So the AOC is sounding an alarm on another potential Capitol riot, which is not something that I would be surprised that if it did happen. But, I think if something else like that were to happen, it would be a lot more deadlier. So the AOC is sounding the alarm. January 6th was a trial run, basically what they say. And so that this is not over with yet. And so this is by Dylan Stableford and Christopher Wilson. This is April the 21st, 2022. So during a town hall meeting with constituents on Wednesday, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she's a Democrat out of New York, warned that something like the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot could happen again, and that the insurrection was thwarted only because Democrats control the House of Representatives. So this is no joke. Okay, so January the 6th was a trial run, and a lot of people don't seem to understand that. So basically, Ocasio Cortez said this, and so it was a trial run. So the storming of the Capitol by the violent mob of then President Donald Trump supporters as the Congress was in process of certifying Joe Biden's victory left multiple people dead, and over 140 officers were injured, and more than 750 people have been charged by the Justice Department in connection with that riot. And so they're going to come back, Ocasio-Cortez said. And if Republicans take the House, then they have the votes to not authorize and legitimize the presidential election. And so the only reason it wasn't worse was because Democrats had the House, and she added that Republicans didn't have the votes in the House. And so you see a still photo of what was January 6th. It was chaos. And you see those flimsy barriers? They were lifting them off the ground. So they weren't really holding them back. They were just like step aside, basically lifting them off the ground and moving them out of the way so they could just enter any way they needed to. And so you don't need that much force to do that, not with those flimsy barriers. And so in the House, 139 Republicans voted against certifying the 2020 election, and the text message published last week showed how some GOP legislators were coordinating their efforts with the Trump White House. Congressional Republicans could work with Trump supporters who still say that the 2020 election was stolen and are now running for the key offices across the country. So that would allow them to oversee the next presidential election at the state level. And so the New York Times editorial board laid out potential issues in February in the open calling for the reform of Electoral Count Act. And so that's stating that the law's confounding language created the space for a seductive narrative about the stolen election and a legal path to take it back. And so what if a state submits two conflicting slates of electors? And so editorial board wrote, and what if the two houses of Congress disagree over which slate is valid? And so that's a different sort of problem. And so while it didn't happen in 2020, it did in 1876 and could cause a major crisis again in 2024. So think about it. So 2024, there are other people who are Trump supporters or Trump inspired who are running for a seat in office in 2024. There are other people who are governors, like DeSantis. There's some other people that are like the Texas, I believe his name is Abbott, if I'm not mistaken. These are the governors and people of other states who basically they are Trump inspired or Trump supporters or co-conspirators, I would say. people who they wanted to do totally away with masks, or they wrote this bill into law um, that we all know about, or some of us know, that don't say gay. There are is quote unquote called that, and then there's also these horrible laws that where they basically are trying to take away the women's rights to choose whether or not they should have an abortion. And so all of these things are playing out. And so that is why these governors are taking these stances and writing these things up. And then you hear about some of these things that are reversing laws, certain things that were put in place to try to protect protected classes. They're trying to make it harder or complicated for people to vote, um, believing that they need an ID in some places, that was an issue. Don't know if it's still an issue or not. I believe it was on several podcasts from people who were taking up concern about that whole issue with the voter ID and some things that were unfair, or looked to be like they were ways to try to discriminate or either make it pretty complicated for people to vote. So all of these things are not a surprise, especially with you have January 6th and people saying that the election was stolen, and then you have all these supporters and these people who are inspired by Trump. So if, say, a Trump aligned governor who believes that the election was stolen refuses to certify a valid popular vote count that favors the Democratic nominee, and instead authorizes his state's Republican electors to cast their ballots for Mr. Trump. And so Ocasio-Cortez has spoken openly about her experience January 6 in 2021, including saying she was working through it in therapy. So in recounting the events of that day, she said that she is hiding in her office bathroom when she heard the voices. That's what happened when the incident in January 6, she was hiding. She initially thought that were those of the rioters, only to realize that they were Capitol Police, and she spent 5 hours hiding in the office of Representative Katie Porter, Democrat of California. So I didn't think that I was going to be I didn't think that I was just going to be killed. But Ocasio-Cortez told CNN last summer she also feared that she would be sexually assaulted as well, because she's had threats, and I've known this to be true, that there's been some people who claim to be supporters of the Trump administration, or people who are Trump inspired, so to speak, quote unquote, that have said some really horrible things that were sexual assault like towards this woman who is speaking in this article. And so I'm not surprised what's going on. I've seen and heard a lot of crazy stuff recently, that there are some people trying to do book banning. They're, targeting people in all kinds of ways with laws. It's like they're making like rules, laws, making them up overnight. It's just like when Trump, as if he's never left. It's actually ignited people and emboldened them to do whatever work that he probably would have continued. Um, so we shall wait and see what happens as a result of this, but I wouldn't be surprised if people in 2024 try to repeat this, but only in a more chaotic, even more aggressive way than what we see. I mean, I would feel like it would be probably more people who felt emboldened to try to take back what they thought was stolen, or they claim, let's say they claim was stolen. So anyway, having said that, I'm gonna let this go. So we shall see what happens with that one, and only time will tell.